So let's talk about your web page's bandwidth. And what is bandwidth? What does it affect? Why do we even care? Bandwidth deals with the size of your web page. And to properly calculate it, it will be also all of its satellite items, all of the other items that are included with your page, all of the images on it. You know, the search engine is only going to call the main page, but the user with their web browser, it's going to load that page, and then it's going to load everything else you referenced, all your CSS, your JavaScript, your applets, your images, your audio, your video, all of that. It's going to be referenced, and it's all going to add up to a total bandwidth of that page. And that matters for several reasons. There are some people that don't have as fast of internet connections as others. It is the size, it is the speed of the connection versus the size of what you're downloading that makes up the speed of that download. So if you have a page that has a huge bandwidth, it's going to be slower to download over the same connection. It might not be noticeably on some higher speed connections, but it will be slower. And you know, if you do run across that one viewer that still has an old dial-up connection, well, you know, he might just decide to click on to something else while he's waiting for your page to download. Not everyone has server connections at their house, or fiber, or whatever else. And if they've got a metered connection, such as a cell phone that only has, say, 2 gigabytes a month on it, whatever your page's bandwidth is when it gets downloaded, that is going to be deducted from their bandwidth allowance, from their data limits. It's almost exact what that is. When we properly calculate the full page bandwidth, that is. There are things that you can do to affect your page's bandwidth, but there's another thing too that it also affects. Web hosting services oftentimes fall into two major categories. A lot of them give you the unlimited, but they're more expensive. Then you can find some other web hosting services that don't cost you as much, but they're going to watch your bandwidth a lot more. Which means if you want your site to continue working, if you want to get a good deal, you build a small bandwidth website and you host it with those cheap providers. And if it's a very well done website, then yeah, you don't have any problem with that. So yeah, it affects a lot of things. It affects your hosting, it affects speed, it can affect the client's data limits as well. So we do want to keep it low. This number is something that we want to keep low. And how do you affect your page's bandwidth? There are things that you can do, options you can select on things, ways that you can find out what it is, and understanding when you're setting things up just how it's going to play an effective role on the bandwidth. So yeah, how do we affect that? We're going to look into some of that too. Talked about why it's important. So all we really need to know now is how to calculate it and how to affect it. The most effective way to calculate it just before you publish it is to actually check the file sizes and expect that there could be up to another kilobyte or few added to the web headers sent with every single file that's downloaded. Those are HTTP headers. Then we're going to get into some of the, well, that's the HTTP pages are not going to use as much. The CSS and things like that, your text-based stuff is not going to use as much bandwidth. They're almost not a big concern unless they really are huge. They're going to be a few K. Your headers are going to be a little bit less than that. They're very small. Compiled code is very difficult to tell. It depends on what you did exactly. So those you're going to want to just get the properties of them, find out how big the compiled installer is, or whatever it was that was, the class file for Java or whatever it be. You're going to want to find out what that size is. But there are some things you can kind of estimate and you can make decisions on, like media items, images, animations, and videos, or also audio, such as sound and music. There are some considerations we can use when we add these to our Flash or to our Java, or especially directly to the page. There are some kind of formulas that we can use to determine pretty close to exactly what it is. Now, there's another property that I didn't add on to here, which is a compression factor, and that's going to depend on which format that you save it in. So if you're saving it as a JPEG, it will be smaller than if it was a BMP. If your compression's better, it will become smaller that way. But this is just the general idea of any image, animation, or video. And I'm going to explain that here. So the header is not the HTTP headers. This deals with a header within the file itself, is oftentimes present, and describes more about that media file. And it's small. It's usually pretty negligible in its size. But it's on top of these other things that really stack up fast. X and Y, your width of your image, animation, or video, and your height of it. Now, depth deals with your color depth. It makes a huge difference. And your length, these are all multiplied. You cut any of these things down, it's going to cut down everything. Your length is, how long is that? How many, if it's an image, then it's just one frame. If it's an animation, it's how many frames of animation. If it's a video, how many frames of video. And that adds up pretty quickly. Just count 30 frames a second. What you're going to get in 1 minute is it's going to be 30 frames a second, so it's going to be 30 times 60. It's going to be like 1800 or something like that it comes out to being. It stacks up very quickly on video, and that's why videos are some of your heaviest items that you're going to have. So, let's say you're going to use a background image. Should you make it the whole screen, or can you make it a smaller portion of that screen and repeat it? If you use a repeat command, it's going to cut down your X and your Y significantly, your width and your height, because now you're sending a small little, maybe 16 by 16, as opposed to 1,000 by 1,000. Now your size just dropped through the floor because these guys are multiplied together and they're both very low. Then if you change your color depth and make them, instead of millions color, down to 256, well, how many bits is that per pixel that we just did? Because we took how many pixels we have here and we just slashed that. Let's just say 256 for 16. That's a quarter cut in one direction, and then another quarter cut in the other one. That's going to be down to, just for the example here, but that's going to be cut down by cutting it down by a quarter in each. That's going to divide it by 16. It's going to be 1/16 of the size. Then if you take the color depth from 256 color and drop it down to 16 color, now you have another half of the number of bits used on that. That's half the bits. So now you've just cut it in half again in size, just about. I mean, you've got that header on there that's negligible, but yeah, I mean, so it's cut down to 1/16, cut down to half that, 1/32, and, well, maybe it was an animation, but you're going to cut down the number of frames. Making those little decisions to use a compressed format, to use a smaller size and stretch it, to use less colors, it can make a tremendous difference. To use a less of a frame rate, to have your frame stay up longer and just use a less of a frame rate, I mean, that's a multiplier. These are all multipliers add together for images. And with sound, audio such as sound and music, your sound effects, your music, whatever they be, there's a similar process for figuring them out as well. Your header is a negligible Usually in most formats it's very small. You've got your quality, which is like how many bits are they using to define what your sound is. Are you using, just 8 bits to tell where your wave is? Or are you using 16 or 32, 64? Just how defined is the point on your wave, and then the bit rate, how often is that recorded? Those are multiplied together. So those small little quality differences that you barely hear, they're doubling, they're quadrupling the size of your file. Your bit rate, yeah, that's another thing too. Exactly. You may hear it. Most people might not. You might consider that, because quadrupling your bit rate quadruples your size of your file in the end. It's a multiplier. And the length of the file is also determined on that too. How many bits a second, how many seconds long. Does it need to be that long? Can you make it a certain length and then repeat it? These are things that you might consider in making your page less bandwidth, and therefore more to make it use less bandwidth and therefore be much faster and much more accessible, able to be hosted in more places. Thank you for watching.